How can we structure it? How can we shape it? What kind of innovations put into place will allow it to last longer than, say, just something that's going to be made out of wood and be placed in there for a very temporary period of time. But yeah, you're right, Brew. That would be the type of discussion when you're looking at sustainability you would want to bring to the table.
I see. Okay. And what we can learn from the honeybees?
Well, let me go to these are two extremes.
Okay.
The honeybees and the desert locusts. I chose these two type of insects because honeybees are usually the insect that most people say represents the perfect and most ideal society.
Really?
They're balanced, they're structured. Yeah, they in the United States we have uh, emblems which are represented different states throughout this country. We have 26 different states that have chosen the honeybee as their state insect. They recognize it for being industrious. It's a good example of just how to get the greatest benefit of the resources provided. The state of Utah, for example, has put a honey bee on the very center of their flag for the state. So people have elevated that insect to be the perfect example of a sustainable society. On the other end of the spectrum, Brew, is the desert locust, and you may not be aware of this, but I mean, even in the Bible, it's the eighth plague. It's the very destruction of society. Desert locusts can explode in number in a very short period of time if they show up on the horizon or at your national boundary. You're looking at a famine. You're looking at perhaps the total destruction of your society and anything you desire to eat. So most people hate the desert locust and say that's the example of the most unsustainable of societies, whereas the honeybee is the most sustainable. Many people then would say, well, let's tell you all the lessons about honeybee that are right and all the lessons about the desert locust that are wrong. And then we'll just wash our hands of it and be done with it.
Wait a second. Isn't desert locust like the type of grasshopper?
Well, actually, that's a good point. See, a desert locust in 1920 was discovered to be a grasshopper that had a phase change, and it was actually Boris Urey, who was a Russian entomologist, who brought to the table that this desert locust was actually just a grasshopper who had been placed in a very, very stressful situation, resulting in the morphing of this particular grasshopper into something that societies couldn't handle because it came in such large number. It changed its practices and pretty much it destroyed everything in sight.
All right, so A Bug's Life had got something right. Remember this Pixar movie? It was like
Yeah,
it was like the ants. Oh, but I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. We're talking about bees. Forget what I said. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the desert locust in this morphing from a grasshopper, which you just mentioned, into a desert locust, goes through a period of five changes. These changes will change its coloring, it'll change its operation, it'll change its brain size. The brain of a desert locust is 30% larger than its comparable grasshopper counterpart. It'll actually start to change its behavior so it's gregarious as opposed to solitary. If you find a grasshopper, they're usually green, they're at night, they're munching on some type of lettuce or some type of grass in a garden area. When you find a locust, they have decided to gang up, if you would. They decided to move as a large group. They've decided to uh, descend upon the countryside in mass. They even, in color change, they've decided to change their color from a green to a yellow with, in many cases, black spots, which signals to the predators, birds and other things, that this is something different than what they were chewing on last week. Something that in its growth has become almost overwhelmingly powerful. Now, from a human standpoint, we're like, well, that's obviously not a society we want to be around because the result is they destroy our society. They consume everything that we have that we would like to have as food or farm implements and the like. But the concept here is that, yeah, they do that, but that society by itself has some beneficial examples of a society that exists.
Really?
See, yeah, yeah, Brew, the situation is that in order to quell the overwhelming power of a desert locust swarm, it's necessary for an international United Nations group to come together because desert locusts have no respect of national boundaries. If you want to deal in northern Africa with a group of 5, 10, maybe even 50 billion locusts coming across the border at you, you had better have the material in place to be able to stop them before they get to a point where, I'm sorry, your economy has now been decimated. Your country is. But we can learn from them. See, there's a growth within the desert locust that occurs, for example, because of stress. My book talks about stress, work allocation, decision making, communication, maintaining a balance and attention within society. Let's start with stress. A desert locust under stress that is first finding itself in a very rich environment of which it's been able to consume and grow and strengthen its numbers is then uh, kind of found to be suppressed when those own resources start to shrink. For example, if it was all of a sudden in a very luscious garden, and then without rain for a period of time, that luscious garden became less and less luscious, became more and more of a desert themselves. These grasshoppers will find themselves rubbing up against each other. They'll find themselves in the need of having more insects, more grasshoppers, more locusts as they're starting to turn into that, than is available to be fed. This prompts a stress change, an environmental stressor that allows them to grow. It allows them to increase in number, in strength. They begin to congregate closely. And as these morphine changes happen in their body, their brain increases inside, they become stronger. Their very practices begin to change. So, yeah, and this is an insect that most people say, well, we need to destroy. Now, from a human standpoint, we're not going to compete with the locust for the limited resources we have here. But as a society, that stress has actually been to their benefit.
Mm. That's
Now, on
so
the opposite end of
interesting. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, okay, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you would have honeybees having to deal with stress.
Hmm.
Now, honeybees are extremely orderly. Uh, there's one queen. If you went through some beekeeping training, you know that the entire population is pretty much worker bees, a queen with a very small number of drones. The
Oh,
queen is female,
yeah.
the workers are female, the drones are male. The drones are less than